tucked in the shadowed corner of a royal chamber beneath layers of time and silence, set a jewelry box untouched for decades, princess, and opened it expecting dusty trinkets and nothing more. Nestled inside was a letter. I had no choice. The first line, read. Her breath caught her hands, trembled. The past, unspoken, unresolved, swept in like a storm. Why now? She whispered. What was meant to remain hidden had waited patiently for her. And in that quiet moment, with one simple note, everything changed. The tears came swiftly. No one, not even Anne, was ready for what she found. Diana's silent warning. As summer crept toward its end in 1997, Princess Diana sensed the ticking of an invisible clock. I feel like I'm running out of time, she once whispered to a close friend. Her nights were restless, her thoughts scattered, and her heart heavy. There was a sudden urgency. And everything she did, especially in the letters she wrote, with trembling hands and guarded words, Diana poured her emotions onto paper, sending her thoughts to those she trusted. There are things I need to say, she wrote in one, before I no longer can. Among the many letters she penned, one remained hidden for over 26 years. Letter unlike the rest, it was addressed to someone she had never been close to. Princess and their relationship had always been icy, and the no-nonsense royal was cold and reserved. Diana, on the other hand, was the warm and expressive people's princess. Their personalities clashed. She never liked me much, Diana once confessed, but this letter wasn't about seeking peace. It was a warning. In the wake of her divorce from Prince Charles, Diana had shed the title of Her Royal Highness. She was free, yes, but freedom came with a steep price. Without that title, I'm alone, she admitted to a friend. Diana dove headfirst into a whirlwind life, globe-trotting, championing causes, and finding new love. And Dodie Fade, the world watched her every move. Cameras flashed, headlines screamed, but underneath it all, Diana was haunted. They're watching me, she said more than once. She felt eyes and every shadow, and heard whispers in every hallway. In late 1996, Diana wrote a chilling letter to her former butler, Paul Burrell. They are planning an accident in my car, she warned. Head injury to make it look accidental. Her handwriting was rushed, the words panicked. Many dismissed it as paranoia, but those closest to her knew Diana was not imagining things. She was scared, deeply scared. And it was during this fragile time between May and July of the following year that she wrote to Princess. And why? And that question lingered. Some believed Diana saw, and not as a friend, but as a royal gatekeeper, someone who could sound an alarm inside the family if needed. Diana was stepping on powerful toes. Her landmine campaign, particularly her walk through an active minefield in Angola, had sparked global attention. I have to be their voice, she told reporters, but her humanitarian work was stirring unrest in political and military circles. She's meddling, they grumbled behind closed doors, and Diana knew it. She knew her. Her actions were making enemies, quiet, dangerous ones. The letter to Anne may have been her last attempt to pass the truth into safe hands. Perhaps she hoped that one day, when it mattered most, someone would open that letter and listen. Princess Diana's final days were filled with love, courage, and quiet warnings, and some way, where between her words and her fears, her truth still wait to be fully heard. But how did a letter Diana wrote decades ago finally reach her now? The note beneath the velvet. It began with a letter playing on Valono royal crest, just Prince William's name written carefully, and his hand inside. The words were simple but deliberate. He asked Princess Anne to come to Kensington Palace, not for a public event, not for family business, just to step into a single room before the renovation. Since he wrote, no pressure, but Anne knew better. This wasn't a casual visit, this was something deeper. The room hadn't been touched in nearly 30 years. Diana studied and hesitated. She hadn't been inside that room since the summer of 1997. The space had always felt tight, with tension, never warmth. She and Diana I had never been close. Diana was all heart, all feeling, and was precision duty edge. Still they shared one silent truth: survival in the palace came at a price. And read the letter twice, maybe 3 times, and then without telling anyone she agreed, not for herself, for William. And maybe, just maybe, for Diana, to a staff member, met her at the side entrance and led her down the hallway. Nothing had changed. Same walls, same stillness. The portraits looked like ghosts when the door opened, and felt her chest tighten. The light spilled in like it had that summer soft and golden. Diana's study was frozen in time. Silk flowers still stood in a vase. Books and pale blues and navy lined the shelves. Then and saw it a small table near the window with a velvet-covered box, floral, familiar. Diana's. She moved toward it, expecting little, maybe trinkets, a brooch, a strand of costume pearls. But when she lifted the lid, her breath caught. There, nestled in velvet, lay the sapphire and diamond brooch Diana had worn to a state banquet in 1983, a gift from the Queen herself, and remembered that night clearly, the way Diana entered the room, radiant and silent, commanding every gaze. But it wasn't the brooch that shook her, it was the faded note taped inside the lid, dated July of 1997. It read, "If an ever sees this, I hope she understands why I chose kindness." And hands trembled. The jewelry meant nothing now. This was something else, a whisper from the past, a final message, and it had waited nearly 30 years to be heard. The sapphire's secret. The sapphire glittered in the morning light, just as it had on that unforgettable night in 1983, but Princess Anne's eyes weren't on the jewel, they were locked on the paper, her folded yellowed note tucked beneath the velvet lining of the old jewelry box. Diana's handwriting curved across the page, elegant, hurried, but unmistakably hers. "If an ever sees this, I hope she understands why I chose kindness." The word struck her like a blow. Her breath caught, her fingers tightened. Diana adored, misunderstood, admired, had never been reckless. If she left a note, she meant for it to be found and held. Brooch and her palm tracing the familiar edges of the gym that night returned with full force. A state banquet, the cameras, the expectations. Diana had entered the room wearing that very brooch like a battle shield. And that was when Anne first understood Diana's strength wasn't in her title. It was in her defiance. To her presence she used grace like a sword, and whispered to herself, why this piece? Why now? And why her? She looked again. Another faded line emerged from the paper, blurred, but still visible. "The crown takes everything, don't let it take my boys." Anne. "But Diana, I want my favorite line as the boy." That and froze. Silence swallowed the room. Protocols, rules, royal silence, all crumbled. This wasn't a message, it was a plea, a cry from beyond the grave. Diana was trying one last time to be heard, and then was finally listening by morning, and returned to the room alone. Maybe she had a match, and at all, but no, the note was still there, real, intentional, deeply personal. Just a few final lines. "Now you're the only one who told the truth. You never pretended. Thank you for that. Please protect William if I cannot." And blinked back, the sting in her eyes. She had challenged Diana, argued, pushed back, but never lied, never hated. She had respected her more than she ever admitted aloud. She remembered Diana once smiling and saying, "You care what you hide it too well," and had brushed it off. Now she wasn't so sure. In that quiet chamber's something inside, and finally cracked. Not grief, not guilt, just raw, searing regret. Diana broke the rules, and had obeyed them, but now only the boys remained, and feared the crown was breaking them too. Even in her final days, what was the one wish Diana clung to with all her heart? Diana's last wish. The rain fell gently on the palace windows the night the letter was found. Princess Anne stood motionless by the old cedar desk, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the aged parchment. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, hurried, but still dignified. "If an ever sees this, I hope she understands why I chose kindness. The words struck her like a gust of cold air. They belonged to Diana, and though decades had passed, the emotions were still raw. The sapphire ink shimmered under the lamplight, and always the stoic closed her eyes. "Why now?" she whispered. "After Diana's death, Princess Anne married herself in duty. She remained distant from public emotion, choosing discretion over spectacle. Unlike other members of the royal family, she kept the press at bay. Her personal life, tightly sealed behind tradition or relationship with her nephews William and Harry, had always been polite but remote, yet beneath the surface. Many suspected she quietly rooted for them to grow, to break free, to choose a different path, and though never vocal, had long believed the monarchy needed reform. They should have room to breathe, she once said quietly to a friend, referring to the younger royals when Harry and Meghan shocked the world by stepping back in 2020 and remained silent. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, have released a statement saying, "We intend to step back as senior members. No condemnation, no cold statements, just quiet observation." The palace murmured the tabloids how old, but and simply watched. Some believed it was because of what she remembered from Diana. That hidden note had lingered in her memory for years, its message both heartbreaking and liberating. Diana hadn't begged, she hadn't been accused. Instead, she had hoped that Anne of all people would understand that love and freedom sometimes mattered more than titles and duties. Window. Diana's letter eventually surfaced. It sparked more than headlines. Became close and 30 extending letters. That is really incredible. It shows just how close Diana were. The people she met really established that. It reignited a deep aching question: hadn't fulfilled the plea, or had she, like the institution itself, let it fade into the shadows? The royal family had tried to bury the letter, to preserve appearances, to protect the legacy, but truth, like Diana's spirit, refused to be silenced. The world read her words, and in them found not despair but clarity. Let them be who they are, not just princes, not just heirs. Let them live. The monarchy had always prided itself on adapting, on bending just enough to survive, but Diana had seen through the illusion. She had seen the cracks, the resistance to change, the suffocating traditions, the fear of vulnerability. Her letter was more than a mother's wish. It was a warning wrapped in grace, a signal of what could come if the family didn't learn to evolve. More than 20 years later, her vision felt prophetic. The public no longer idolized crowns, they demanded transfer, currency, purpose, and compassion, and Diana had known that tide was coming. After her death, the palace resumed its quiet choreography. That Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact been killed in that car accident in Paris just a few hours ago. There had been mourning turned to routine. William and Harry, Dresden-tailored grief, were ushered back into royal molds. The institution marched on unchanged, but Diana's presence lingered in smiles, in rebellion, in quiet choices. As the boys grew, so did their questions, and eventually their resolve. William embraced duty, but insisted on modern love. He married Catherine, a woman not born into royalty, but raised with heart. Together, they redefined what a royal couple could look like. There were school drop-offs, hugs in public, and laughter, real laughter. Diana had wanted William to rule, but on his terms, not as a puppet, as a man. Harry, however, chose another route. His exit with Meghan echoed his mother's battles: press harassment, internal silence, emotional isolation. When he left, people gasped, and did not. She said nothing, no rebuke, no praise, just silence, the same silence that had followed her when she first read Diana's letter. Perhaps in that moment she had already made her choice: to listen, to remember, to quietly support as the monarchy faced growing scrutiny, and long-held beliefs began. The surface she had always favored: a smaller, more efficient royal family, one with purpose, not burden. Not everyone needs a balcony moment, she had once quipped. Her vision was practical, and though no one said it aloud, eerily similar to Diana's. A monarchy that didn't devour its children, a family where stepping back wasn't betrayal, But evolution were being royal didn't mean surrendering your soul, and silence became its kind of voice when others questioned Harry and Meghan's motives. She stood back when they shared their pain. She did not flinch. Perhaps she knew the cost already. Perhaps she remembered the tear-stained letter once hidden in her drawer. Diana's words had not asked for revolution. They had asked for compassion, for a chance to be human, for sons who would live with purpose, not perform it. Now, as the monarchy stands on certain ground, Diana's shadow looms larger than ever. The people no longer bow seam only because they are told they want meaning, change, real connection. Diana saw this and perhaps did too. The question is no longer whether the institution should change, but whether it is still capable of doing so, can shed its fear, can it finally hear what Diana tried to say. Although Anne and Diana were never on the best of terms and knew this was the moment to set old feelings aside and take the necessary steps before it was too late. The note that changed everything. By the end of the week, Princess Anne knew what she had to do. She didn't sleep much the night before. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, Diana's words echoed back to her, fragile yet fears written in ink. The time couldn't fade so early one morning, and requested a private audience with her brother. No aides, no protocol, just the two of them. King Charles agreed, though he didn't ask why. He must have known, and they met in a required sunlit room at Clarence House, the kind of room meant for reflection, not declarations, and walked in briskly holding something small, and her palm. She didn't sit. She placed the brooch on the table, and beside it a single folded note, no royal seal, just age-worn edges and Diana's familiar script. Charles looked at it without reaching for it, his brow furrowed. "What is this?" he asked quietly, read it, and said, her voice tight. He picked it up with hesitant fingers, read it once, then again. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to something Anne had rarely seen on her brother's face, pain. A long silence followed. "She left you that?" he asked, barely above a whisper, and nodded. "She feared the machine would break her sons." She said it nearly. He did. Charles looked down, unable to meet her eyes. The past hovered between them like a ghost, the weight of what they didn't say in the 90s, the silence that had settled over Diana's name like dust on forgotten history. "We all thought we had time," Charles murmured finally, and sat down. "This wasn't about blame. It was about what came next." She told him calmly, clearly, that things needed to change, not just for the public, not just for the sake of appearances, but inside the family. She urged him to rethink William and Harry's places in the monarchy, not as roles, not as duty-bound figures, but as human beings. Later that night, Palace insiders whispered of a quiet order given by the king, a full review of the royal strategies involving both sons. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a beginning. 2 days later, Anne stood outside Adelaide Cottage holding the same envelope in her hands. It felt heavier than paper should. Inside was Diana's letter, hidden beneath a velvet jewelry box. For nearly 3 decades she hadn't told Prince William or Princess Catherine she was bringing it. She wasn't sure how they'd react, especially William. There were no cameras, no reporters, just 3 people in a quiet drawing room. Catherine offered tea and declined. She sat down across from William and pulled the letter from her coat pocket without a word. She placed it on the table. William looked at her with surprise, then curiosity. He picked it up and unfolded it slowly. His eyes scanned the page, then returned to the top. He read it again a third time, his lips pressed into a hard line. His shoulders dropped. He didn't speak for a moment, then softly, "Do you think she'd be proud?" And didn't hesitate. "She already was," she said. Catherine reached out and rested her hand on his. She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. In her eyes was a kind of fierce understanding, a woman who to care. Read the burden of the crown, knowing the weight it placed on love, on identity, on motherhood, and leaned forward. Her voice dropped lower, but her words were sharper. "The world still needs to hear her." she said, not as a saint, not as a media creation, as a woman, a mother, a truth teller. You don't have to build her a statue, William, just don't let them erase her. William didn't reply right away, but something in him shifted. The room felt different, more grounded, not heavy, not broken, just honest. A kind of sacred silence followed, one that connected them not as royals but as people trying to carry a legacy they never chose yet could never escape. That night, and returned to her private quarters. No secretary, no dictated speech, just a desk, a pen, and a blank card. She stared at it for a long time before writing. It wasn't formal. There were no titles, no crests, no Dear Duke. It was simply addressed Harry. She didn't apologize, because she knew words couldn't fix what years of silence had frayed. But she acknowledged the distance, the things left unsaid, the moments lost of pride and protocol. She wrote, "Your mother loved you. I should have said that more." She signed it. No expectations, no demands, no need for a reply, because for the first time in decades, and stopped protecting the institution and started protecting the truth, not the polished version on official documents, not the curated image seen from palace windows, the raw human truth Diana had left behind like breadcrumbs, hoping someone would follow, and in that simple, quiet act, and didn't just honor the woman the monarchy once failed. She began to heal the wounds it had buried, not with grand gestures or public declarations, but with sincerity, with courage, with a single letter passed from one generation to the next. But what was the mystery behind the jewelry box, and what other message did it hold? The hidden sketches, Diana's final whisper, and returned to Diana's study one last time before the renovations would sweep it clean. She told the staff it was for closure, that she merely wanted a final walk through the past. But deep inside she knew better. Something's not right about that box, she had muttered days earlier. To no one in particular, the weight of it had unsettled her, not just its physical heft, but the way it felt, deliberately placed, to centered, to intentional, almost as if it had been waiting for her. This time she came alone, no aides, no cameras, just the echo of silence and the scent of memory. The air inside the room held traces of lavender and the faint musk of aged paper. It was like time itself had stopped here, preserving a piece of a life that once roared with brilliance, and walked slowly, stopping by the window where she'd found the jewelry box weeks ago. She sat down, the weight of anticipation settling over her shoulders. "Let's see what you were really hiding, Diana," she whispered. She placed the box on. He